All right, welcome to Cruz Learning, where it's just that easy. With your favorite host, Professor Cruz. And today we're going to talk about slope. It's all about that slope, All right, so here we go. If you have a linear function, which we talked about in last class, then you have a graph that represents a line. So let's talk about the slope for a second. The easiest way to find the slope is by counting. So I could go to my line and pick any points that I know for sure. Now, for this particular case, I'm gonna go from left to right. So from the top of the graph to the left, I see that I have a point right here. Okay, so I know that point for sure because if you notice, it crosses at the edge, right? At the edge, and that point will be the point -2 comma 10, right? I will be able to see -2 comma 10. That's a point in my graph. Another point that I know for sure is this point right here. This point right there, that's the next point that I know for sure, right? When I'm moving here, I'm not sure over there, not sure over there, but once I reach the y value of 4, I know for sure that point. So that will be the point -2 comma 4. Because remember, like we said last time, every time that we graph anything, it's always x comma y, where the x value goes first. This is the x-axis. That is the y-axis. All right, perfect. So if we have 2 points, how do I calculate the slope? Well, the first way to calculate slope is by counting. That's why I have one, count. All right. So let's talk about the slope before we actually count it. The slope is usually represented by the variable m. Okay. And the m, what it represents is the vertical change. Okay. The vertical change over, and I'm going to use this triangle to represent the word change, over the horizontal change. Okay, horizontal change. Now, you might have heard in the past this being called rise over run. Okay, rise over run. And that's the reason why. Because, the vertical change, you either go up or you go down. So, from my vertical change, if I go up, that number is going to be positive, meaning if I have to move up in my graph, that number will have to be positive. If I have to move down in my graph, that number is going to be negative. Okay, that number is going to be negative. So that number on top of the line is going to be one number when I count. Similarly, horizontally speaking, when I look at the x-axis, the positive numbers are to the right. As I move to the right, like in a number line, okay, so if I move to the right, numbers are going to be positive. If I move to the left, the number is going to be negative. So I hope that that makes sense. Another way that you could see slope, okay, is represented as the change of y over the change in x. Okay, the change in y over the change in x, which gives us the famous slope formula, y2 minus y1 all over x2 minus x1. So these are different ways that we could find slope. Okay, so let me explain to you what I mean by vertical change and horizontal change, right? In this problem, when I look at the top point, -4 comma 10, okay, -4 comma 10, how many times or how many units do I need to move down to reach my other point? Well, I'm gonna move now. Be careful because my graph is going up by twos. It's not going up by ones. Okay, so I'm gonna have to move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units down. So I'm gonna write down for my slope on the left of this graph. Actually, let me just write down 6 over here because there were 6 unit changes from 10 all the way down to 4. Okay, so I'm gonna write down the slope down here, m equals. So that was the vertical change, and I went down, so it's gonna be -6. Okay, over. So because I went down, it was negative. And then how many times do I need to move to get from -4 to -2? Well, 1 and 2. So I move 2 to the right. So that's a +2 right there. So -6, +2. And then when I finally get my answer, the answer is that the slope is -3. So that's how you will find the slope of any line, right? The slope of any line. Now, let me be clear about this real quick. Okay, so over here, the answer is -3. Make sure that you simplify your answer always. You could double check your answer, and you could double check your answer using the Cruz way. Okay. Now, the Cruz way is not an official way, all right? It's just a little hack that you can use to double check if your answer is correct. So, how can we do that? Well, you always read from left to right. Okay, everything that you've learned in this life so far, hopefully, you learn how to do it from left to right if you were raised in America. So, when you learn how to read, you do it from left to right. When you learn how to write, you write from left to right. So when you are going to graph, you're going to graph from left to right, and you're going to read graphs from left to right. So when I look from left to right, is my line going up or going down? When if I start from left to right and I start going over my line and trying to go over it, it looks like I'm going down, right? I'm going down. I'm moving down. So this is a negative slope. This is a negative slope. Okay, so I could double check with my answer and it looks like, yep, it is negative. So let me give you a quick example of a positive slope, a negative slope. Okay, so if I have a graph, and my graph is moving from left to right and it's going down, that's a negative slope. My final answer should be negative. Just by looking at it, you should be able to tell that it's going to be negative. If I have a graph and that graph from left to right, without moving my pencil, right, without lifting my pencil, I'm going up, that will be a positive slope. So that is very, very important that you know. Negative slope is decreasing, going down. Positive slope is increasing, going up. Okay, so very, very important. So let's move on to the next problem to see if we get it. Okay, so the second way that you could find out the slope, it says find the slope of the line passing through the points, and they give me points, and then use the slope formula. Well, this is the second way that you could find a slope using the slope formula. This is a very, very important formula that you need to memorize. You need to know how to use it, okay? And it's very important that you understand what these things mean. The first step when you're gonna find a slope is that you need 2 points. To be order to find a slope, you need 2 points. Somehow they have to give to you. So they gave you 2 points. The first step that you need to do is to label the points, people. It only takes 3 seconds to label points. It might take me a little bit longer, okay, because I'm explaining it. But labeling the points allows you to make less mistake, minimize the mistakes. So notice that the first point, I label it x1, y1. A point is always x comma y. A common mistake that I've seen is that people label the first point x1, x2, and then they go to the second point and it goes crazy because they say y1, y2, and the point has no x value. That's crazy. A point is always x comma y. The first point is x1, y1. The second point is x2, y2. Okay, always, always. That's how you label points. The next step is to rewrite my equation. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite the fraction bar, and I'm also going to write the minus signs. It's very important that you write the minus signs now because people tend to get confused, the minus sign with the negatives in the number, and I will tell you what I mean in a second. So what is my y2? My y2 in this problem is -8, so I'm going to plug in -8. Okay. Um, and then my y1 is -7. And this is what I mean when people get confused. People say sometimes they just write the 7 because it's a minus already. No, the minus and the negative signs, these are two different signs we're talking about. So this is going to be -7. This is going to be -7, and you put it in parentheses. Okay. X2 is just -6, and x1 is just 5. Okay. Now, something that I've learned is that when I put things in parentheses, negative signs in parentheses, I can always connect the two negatives. I don't know if you've heard that two negatives equals a positive. So if you have two negatives, I kind of go over and I connect the minus sign with the negative, and I go over the parentheses to create a messed up plus sign. That messed up plus sign tells me that I have to add. And I can only do that if I have two negatives together with a parenthesis in between, and no number in between, right? So in reality, what I have is -8 plus 7 over, I can combine this, -6 minus 5, same sign, add and keep. That's just -11, all right? You know the song, right? Same sign, add and keep, different sign, subtract. Keep the sign of the higher number, then you'll be exact. Yay! All right, so the top one, -8 plus 7 is just -1 divided by -11. But I cannot have a simplified answer with two negatives. So this is really positive 1 over 11. So the answer here, it will be positive 1 over 11. All right. There any questions? If you have any questions, just go back, okay, and rewind so that you can see how to properly use the slope formula. All right, number 3. Number 3 talks about a word problem, and you will find word problems in these, okay? And you're gonna have to use the slope formula to figure out what they want. So if you read the problem, they're telling you the phone company, Rangular, has a monthly cellular plan where a customer pays a flat monthly fee and a certain amount of money per minute used. Okay, every time that you see money per minute, right? Let me give you some examples. That's an example. Money per minute, miles per hour, dollars per whatever it is, every minute, every second. All those words are keywords to let you know there's a rate of change. There's a rate of change. And slope is usually known as the rate of change. All right. That's what slope is. It's how fast is my graph going up or going down, increasing or decreasing, right? How much is my amount of money or whatever it is increasing or decreasing? So how fast is my rate of change changing? In this case, miles per hour will be for velocity, right? That we use to read. I'm sorry, to drive. So here we go. Here's a problem. You have money per minute. So my money, right? My slope is going to have money on the numerator per minute in the denominator. Okay, money per minute. Um, so it says if a customer uses 290 minutes, the monthly cost will be $58. Perfect. They just gave me a point. They just gave me a point, and I'm going to write that point down. Now, keep in mind, because my rate of change is money per minute, okay, you need to think about which one is the independent variable. What depends on what? How many minutes depends on how much the cost was, or the cost depends on how many minutes? Well, the cost depends on how many minutes, and if you don't see it, the change in y over the change in x. So my minutes is going to be my x value. Okay, my minutes is going to be my x value, which in this case is 290 minutes. And my y is going to be $58. That's my first point. And I'm going to call it x1, y1. I hope that you could create the second point before I do it. It says if a customer uses 910 minutes, the monthly cost will be $120. So here's my second point. My second point says that if I use 910 minutes, then my cost is going to be $120. That's my second point, and I'm going to label it X2, Y2. Okay. With this, then you could plug in these numbers into the slope formula. Okay, so let's do that real quick so that you can see how that works one last time. So I'm going to have 120 fraction bar with minus on top and minus at the bottom, and then I plug in my numbers, right? So y2 is 120 minus y1, which is 58. And then x2, which is 910 minus 290. Okay, minus 290. Now you simplify that number, and at the end, you will get 0.1. Okay, so if you subtract 120 minus 58, that's a 58 right there. You're going to get a result, and then you divide that by whatever 910 minus 220 is, and at the end, it's going to give you 0.1. So my answer for the slope is going to be 0.1. Remember, fraction means division. You write the numerator, the top, and then you divide by the denominator, the bottom. And then, what does it mean? Choose the answer that best describes what the slope means. Well, I wrote right here what the slope means. Okay, it has to deal something with money per minute. So when I read the problems or the choices, the first one says the monthly cost, okay, will be the same regardless the minutes used. Okay, that's not true at all because they gave me two different points and the cost is not the same. So this is not right. The monthly cost will decrease at the calculated rate per minute. This is not true because my slope is positive, it's not negative. If it was negative 0.1, then it will decrease. But it doesn't make any sense either because when I spoke more minutes, I paid more money. So that doesn't make sense. The minute will not affect the monthly bill. Well, that doesn't make any sense. That's the first thing, same thing as A in different words. And then the monthly cost will increase at the calculated rate per minute. Okay, that is true. So that will be the correct answer. So that's how you will go one by one. I hope that you're understanding the thinking behind it so that you could see how to calculate the slope in word problems. All right, let's move on to number 4. Let's talk about the second form of equation of a line that we're going to speak. Last time we talked about the standard form of the equation of a line. Today we're going to talk about, this is the third form, so please, the second form, I'm sorry. This is called the slope intercept form. Slope intercept. Why is it called the slope intercept? I'll tell you why. Mathematicians are not very creative. Mathematicians are not very creative, okay? And you will see why in a second. When I look at this equation, okay, this equation tells me that y equals mx plus b. Well, y is my variable. M is going to be my slope. Remember that we've been using slope this entire time, which is the rate of change. And B is the y-intercept. So the reason why this form of the linear equation is called the y-intercept form is just because just by looking at it, you can tell what the slope is and what the y-intercept is. That's why it's called slope y-intercept. But it has to be in that form. It has to be in that form. And in other words, whatever number it's in front of x, so the coefficient of x, it's going to be my slope. And the constant, which is the number by itself, will always be my y-intercept, or my initial condition, as I call it sometimes. So here we go. Give the slope and the y-intercept of the line represented by the y equals 4x plus 8. My first question is that in this form? Is my problem in that form? Yes, it is, because it says y equals, right? So that's really simple. The 4 is the slope, and the number by itself is the y-intercept. And it's just that easy. Notice that it says the y-intercept is in the form of 0, comma b. Because if I plug in 0 for x like we did last time, you completely ignore that. And hopefully you will say that the answer is y equals 8. So 8 is, so when you enter your answer, you have to write down 0, comma 8. So your answer is not just a number, your answer is a point. Your answer must be a point. All right, let's move on. Number 5, give the slope and the y-intercept of the line represented by the equation negative 2x plus 5y equals 1. Well, you might be tempted to say that the slope is negative 2. And remember, you have that's standard form. That is not slope intercept form. So you cannot tell the slope just by looking at this equation. You have to make it look like y equals mx plus b, which means we're going to have to solve for y. And we can do that by adding 2x on both sides or moving the x to the other side. I think I'm going to do it like that better. Sorry about that. You know, I don't know if you know this, but you can just take anything that you have from one side of the equal sign and move it to the other side of the equal sign. If you just do one thing, and that thing is change the sign. You must change the sign. So this will be 5y equals, because I moved the negative 2x to the other side, is going to turn into a positive 2x. I'm not moving 1 from that side of the equal sign, so it stays positive. Notice the only term that I moved was 2x, so the only term that changed sign was 2x. Y is not by itself because it's being multiplied by 5, so I must use inverse operations to get y by itself. So I'm going to divide every single term by 5. When I do that, this cancels, and I get that y equals 2/5 x plus 1/5. Now you have fractions, but fractions are good, right? Fractions are good because you want to make sure that the slope is rise over run, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. But is this in the form of the slope-intercept form? Yes, it is. So you can automatically take whatever the coefficient of x is, which in this case is 2/5, and that's my slope. And the y-intercept is 1/5. But remember, you have to enter in the form 0, comma b. So then that will be 0, comma, well, I'm so sorry. It will be 0, comma 1/5. But they're not asking you to do that. Read the problem. It says b equals. They're just asking you for b, so that b is 1/5. Okay, I'm gonna go to the back. They're just asking you for b, so that b is 8. Okay, make sure that you answer the question they're asking. It says the y-intercept is in the form 0, comma b because you plug in 0, but they're only asking me for b. They're saying b equals. If they give you a point, then you write a point. All right, and b is the number by itself. I hope that this makes sense. One thing that I want to note, when they ask you for the slope, the number one mistake that I see is that when people come here, they're going to tell me that the slope is 4x. If you answer 4x, your answer will be wrong. Why? Because the answer is not 4x, the answer is 4. The slope is a number, not a variable. It's a number. It's a number, and it represents the rate of change. All right, let's move on to the next problem. Moving on to the next problem. All right, we are here in number 6, and it says find an equation of the line that. Now, we're going to talk about parallel lines, perpendicular lines, and neither. Okay, so let's talk about parallel lines, perpendicular lines for a second. If I ask you, what do you know about parallel lines? You'll probably say that they're lines that never touch, they never intersect. And it is true. But now that you are in intermediate algebra, you should know a little bit more. Why don't they touch? Why do they intersect? Well, they don't, because they have the same rate of change. And what do we call rate of change? We call that slope. So if I had line 1, right, it's the top line for me, and line 2 will be the bottom line for me. The slope of line 1 equals the slope of line 2. They always increase at the same rate of change. In this case, because they're both positive slopes, right? Moving from left to right, that I'm moving my pencil up, or my stylus up. If you try to write it, you're gonna go up, so those are positive slopes because it's moving up. So that's the one thing you know about parallel lines, the slopes are equal. What about perpendicular lines? Are the slope equal? Well, definitely not. They're not equal. One is increasing, the other one is decreasing. So what we call that is it's called like this. Perpendicular lines have opposite. So please write this down. It's very important. Opposite, opposite, reciprocal. All right. Opposite reciprocal slope. Opposite reciprocal slope. What does that mean? What it means is that if line 1, okay, if line 1 has a slope of A over B, okay, then line 2 will be the opposite of that. So if it's positive, then it's going to be a negative slope. So in this example, this will be my line 1 with a positive slope, and this will be my line 2 with a negative slope. So it's a negative slope, and it's the reciprocal, meaning that I have to flip the fraction. Okay, so for example, if line 1's a slope, well, we're going to see the example in a second. That's what that means. Neither, well, if two lines are not parallel and two lines are not perpendicular, then they're called neither or intersecting lines. Something to remember, what's the difference between parallel and perpendicular is that the word parallel itself has two parallel lines. Okay, it has two parallel lines. The word parallel has two parallel lines in it. All right, so here we go. Find an equation that has the line A. First condition, has the same y-intercept as the line y minus 4x minus 12 equals 0. So can you tell me what the y-intercept is just by looking at this equation? The answer is no. Okay, now you have two ways of finding the y-intercept. You could solve for y equals mx plus b, or you could plug in 0 for x. I'm going to solve for y equals mx plus b. Okay, so if I just want y by itself, all I have to do is move the 12 to the other side of the equal sign and move the negative 4x to the other side of the equal sign. And I'm going to have that y equals positive 4x plus 12. Remember, I can move anything, any term from one side of the equal sign to the other, as long as I change the sign. Just by looking at it, you should be able to identify that this is slope-intercept form. Therefore, my y-intercept is 12. Okay, so I know my y-intercept. Also, they want a line that it's parallel to the line right here, negative 8x plus 1 y equals negative 5. So my question is, just by looking at it, can you tell me what the what the slope is? Because they want the slope. See, when they say that it's parallel, they're talking about the slope. They're not saying to you, hey, find the slope of that line. But what I know is that if I can see the slope of this line, parallel lines have the same slope. All right. So for that reason, I'm going to have to rewrite this equation in slope-intercept form. So here we go. If I have to rewrite that in slope-intercept form, all I have to do is move the negative 8 to the other side of the equal sign. So I'm going to have that for the second line, y equals positive 8x minus 5. The only one that changed sign was the negative 8x because I moved it from one side of the equal sign to the other. Everything else stays the same. All right. So from this, I said that I only care about the slope, right? I only cared about the slope. So because I only care about the slope, guess what I need to write down the equation of a line in slope-intercept form? I need the slope and the intercept, and I have them both. The slope is 8 and the intercept is 12, and it's just that easy. Y equals, here's the answer, y equals 8x plus 12. All right, let's continue. The next problem says find an equation of the line that has y-intercept 9. Look at that. I don't have to do anything to find the y-intercept. They gave it to me. So automatically I could just come here and write down 9. Okay, and then that it's parallel to this line. Well, the key word for parallel is that it has to have the same slope, right? So I'm going to solve for y equals mx plus b. I'm going to solve this equation for y equals mx plus b. So then I'm going to move the 10x to the other side. And this is going to be negative 7y equals positive 10x plus 8. All right. And then the last step will be to divide every single term by negative 7. And when I do that, this negative 7 will cancel, and I will get that y equals negative 10 over 7, because a positive divided by a negative, it's a negative, minus 8 over 7. Again, a positive divided by negative is a negative. So the only thing I care about this slope is, sorry, about this equation is the slope. That's the only thing I care, because I want it to be parallel. I want it to be parallel. So parallel lines have the same slope. Therefore, the answer here will be negative 10 over 7. Okay, negative 10 over 7, and that will be the answer. That will be the answer. Now, I want to change the question because you may get the question of write a line that it's parallel, but you may also get the question, write a line that it's perpendicular. So what about if the problem says perpendicular and not parallel? Okay, well, I need the y-intercept, right? So y equals mx plus b. I need to fill in the slope and the y-intercept, but they told me the y-intercept right away. The y-intercept is 9. If they want a line that it's parallel to this line, then I need to find the slope. And I know that the slope is negative 10 over 7. But we said that the slope of a perpendicular line is the opposite reciprocal. So because my slope that I just found, so sorry about that, because the slope that I just found is negative, negative 10 over 7. Now my answer is going to have a positive slope. And I'm going to flip 7 over 10 to get its reciprocal. So the answer will be 7 over 10x, 7 over 10x plus 9. Okay, 7 over 10x plus 9, that will be the answer. I hope that makes sense. That's how you find something that's perpendicular. All right, let's do 18 real quick. It says, I'm going to help you set it up, but I'm not going to do it, but I will help you set it up. It says, given below the description of 2 points, and they give you line 1 and line 2, find the slope of line 1, find the slope of line 2. You know what? Let's do it. Let's do it. Why not? Because then they want you to compare them. So the first step to find the slope of 2 points is to do what? Label the points. I hope that you thought about it. X1, Y1, X2, Y2. Now I'm going to have two different answers here, right? So the first one is going to be M equals, and I'm going to set it up with the minus signs, okay, with the minus signs. And when I do that, I'm going to get 133. Remember, the Y's go on top and the X's go at the bottom. And that is something that I've seen that it's a common mistake. People put the X's on top. Just remember, do you remember your X? Your X goes at the bottom. Not the X, but your X. You know what I'm talking about. The X is always at the bottom. The X is always at the bottom. All right. So if I'm gonna simplify this, 133 minus 33 is just 100 over, and then negative 13 minus negative 3, two negatives equals a positive when I connect them, and that's going to give me same sign add and keep, but different signs subtract, right? So that is definitely going to be negative 10, okay, negative 10. And when I get negative 10, 100 divided by negative 10 is just negative 10. So the first slope for the first line is negative 10. All right. So I'm just going to call it M1 because that's the slope for the first line. If I want to find the slope for the second line, I'm going to do it at the bottom. So the slope for the second line, I have to label the points. So let's go back and label the points. Please, it may sound like something simple, but do not make the mistake of writing the right number on the wrong place and then getting the whole problem wrong. Here you have to pay close attention to your algebra, put close attention to your simplifying skills, so you get, because one wrong sign will make the entire problem wrong. This is negative 7 and negative 50. Okay, this will be 8 minus 6. And when you simplify this, negative 7 minus negative 50, this will turn into a plus, and that will be negative 20 over 8 minus 6, which is 2. And look at that, I get negative 10 again. So this is negative 10. And then finally, which of the following is true? Line 1, it's parallel to line 2. Line 1 is perpendicular to line 2, or line 1 is neither parallel nor perpendicular. Well, look at the slopes. You need to compare them. Are they the same slopes? Yes, they are. And we learned that same slopes are parallel lines. So line 1 is parallel to line 2. All right, let's get this party finished. We're about to finish here so that you're able to do all the problems in your homework. The last thing that I want you to do is to learn how to sketch a graph. Now, this is a very, very important uh, strategy that you need. So make sure that you know how to do this. Y equals mx plus b. So number one, plot the y-intercept. Plot the y-intercept. So by looking at the equation, you should be able to tell me what the y-intercept is. And it's a number by itself because it's b. Okay, so that's at 2. So then I go to the y-axis and I plot my point at 2 right there. That's a point at 2. Now, second step, start from the y-intercept and count your slope to plot the next point. Remember, we have a graph, so we can just count. Slope, as a refresher, slope is rise over run, or the vertical change over the horizontal change. So in this case, my slope is 1/2. I hope that you can see that that's the number in front of the x, right? It's just 1/2. So this says from the y-intercept, move up once. So I'm going to move up 1 and then move 2 to the right because they're both positive. 1 and 2. And that's where I could plot my next point. I can do the same thing again. I could move up once, 1 and 2. That's going to be my third point, right? Lines are made of infinitely many points. I could go backwards if I wanted to, right? Uh, I could go backwards if I wanted to, and I have another point right here that when I count to get to the other point, I go up 1 and to the right 2. And then I connect all the dots to create my line. Right? And that's how you graph y equals mx plus b. Always plug the y-intercept first. The biggest mistake that I see people make is that they plug the 2, but then they go back to the origin to count 1 over 2. That's one mistake. And then you plot the point here. And if you plot that point over there, now this is wrong what I'm doing. Look at that. You're going to get a completely different line. And then what it's worse, there's a negative slope. So that's why at the bottom I said double check using the Cruz way. The red line, which is the correct line, has a positive slope. If I move from left to right, I'm going to go up on this line. So it's very important that you move from left to right, because if you move from right to left, that's going to go down, right? So it's very important that you move from left to right. So if you go from left to right, that's going to go up. So it's consistent with my problem, because my problem has a positive 1/2. If I look at the line that I just plotted, with the wrong point, that has a negative slope. So always double check to see if it's increasing or decreasing from left to right, because that could save you a point in a test. Another common mistake, and this is the last mistake that I'm going to mention, is that people think that this 1/2 is an x-intercept, because they know that the y-intercept is 2. They plot it, and then they have 1/2 with x, and they go here and they plot the point at 1/2, and they connect the line. But again, look what happens. No, no, no. That's a no-no, because that's a negative slope. From left to right, I had to go down to draw that line from left to right, but my problem says that the slope is positive. Okay, so it's very, very important that you understand the difference. The right line is the red line. And that is it for the slope of the line. This was Professor Cruz with y-Learning, and it's just that easy.